shaky foundation. It's the entire American system. Look, I'm not gonna ask for permission to be a comedian, to be a thinker, to be an inventor. I'm not gonna ask permission to criticize someone, to call it the way I see it, or set my own priorities as to what I should talk about. The entire point of free speech is that you determine what you should speak about, and further, what you should think about. I'm a sacred cow hunter. I'm looking for the biggest lies that are followed by the most people. I'm looking for the naked emperor that everyone is afraid to call out in his nakedness. I'm looking for the sacred cows that people are worshiping for no reason. I'm not a fluff artist. I can't do it. If you need somebody to help you fall asleep at night and make you stop worrying about all the problems rolling around in your head, I'm not your guy. I'm the guy who's going to help you figure the things out. Who's going to help you stare down your darkest fears and figure out the best way to confront them. There are 5 core, fundamental, kindergarten level problems that the United States has. Which is that there are problems that can be explained to kindergartners, and that any kindergartner should be able to understand why civilization cannot operate under these principles and expect to survive. The first of the 5 fundamental failures of the United States system, the American system, potentially the entire global neoliberal capitalist system, is the paradigm of infinite growth. The idea that if the whole market just grows at 5% every year, then everything will just work out. But they need that growth every single day, that proof of it. Otherwise, the entire system collapses. All those people in all those suits and all those tall buildings who don't know how to plant a potato to save their lives depend upon their numbers and their money supply and their businesses growing at a given rate every year, no matter what happens with the earth. This is built into the money supply, how much money is being printed, how much money is in circulation. This applies to the interest rates. This applies to the bond percentage rates that people use to store money. This applies to the fiat currency situation, where money is created at the moment at which it's loaned out to people. This is built into everything. The speculation in land prices, anything and everything that interest is paid on connects to the idea of the infinite growth. It's a system which could not be more perfectly designed to extrapolate physical resources from a world. It is a paradigm that you would implement on a population you were seeking to subvert and destroy, if all you wanted was the resources underneath the feet of the people that you were trying to allegedly govern. If aliens came to the planet, I'm saying they would institute and all they wanted to do was steal all the land, all the water, all the gold, all the meat, all the air, all the trees. They would institute a policy of infinite growth, exactly like the one that we've allegedly implemented upon ourselves. Insanity is a belief pattern that if you continue believing in it, even if it's not working. The second, phony elections. If a government is allowed to just make up the numbers that give it any legitimacy, then yeah, of course, there's going to be a major problem. If you look at the American electoral system, the votes are all counted in secret. They don't line up with any polls prior to the elections themselves. They ought to be shifted mathematically afterwards so they line up to the actual vote counts. If you can look, there's a gerrymandering, there's the electoral college, systemic factors that are built into the electoral equation that give some people more weight than others. You could say the entire setup of the American Congress, such that the Senate has these tiny states with huge representation versus huge states with tiny representation. That's just already kind of nuts. Then if you look at the vote suppression, the way that certain minorities in certain areas are actively, there are people that actually go out there to try and scare these people away from the polls, and the same as done through advertising, laws. The way elections are conducted in the United States is deeply fraudulent, and in no way conveys legitimacy through the consent of the people who are governed. It is an election system that has little to nothing to do with how many people actually voted for who. The third, phony journalism. We have the infinite growth, phony elections, and fraudulent journalism. And to say that the mass media channels in the United States are run by people who aren't journalists and who have no interest in being journalists, and are essentially propaganda channels for the highest bidder, frequently, or institutional or geopolitical forces that on a given day are the most popular to run with. If I were to describe what you can find in American mass culture, if you just go out looking for it, it's vapid inanity that is frequently, very frequently, coming from a propaganda angle to direct every single person in this country away from the main problems and to keep them out of the constructive space they might be able to do anything about it. People who have the loudest voices in the United States have little to no reason or motivation to actually be factual. No one holds their feet to the fire. If they lie, they can lie freely and get away with it. And so for every true thing I say to you and the 10, 100, maybe even 1,000 people watching this, there's someone this very second just lying to 100,000 people in a big block, and those 100,000 people just run out believing in this really fake world. Some people have called this fake news. I see it more as phony journalists, fraudulent journalists, and then an actual fake reality that's being created by this giant web of lies. What's coming from the top down of the mass media is a non-thinking culture. They're trying to make you literally stupid. And being distracted away from the fundamental illness at the center of all their problems. Then yeah, it would make sense that there's giant bullhorns and megahorns out there that are spouting ignorance and just being a roadblock towards anybody who could be effective at changing anything about the system that is literally killing everybody. Another fundamental problem with the American system is there's two sets of laws for two sets of people. The rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. You could also say there are regional differences or racial differences as well that apply. But for a system that's obviously designed where there's few people at the top who have a lot of resources and many people at the bottom who have very little resources, there's a totally different legal framework for people who exist at the top than those who exist at the bottom. And every single day it gets worse. Which is to say the legal framework is being built as a management tool for very few people to be able to manage very many people. And in order for this to happen, the people at the top get basically everything that they want, except to disrupt the system. And the people at the bottom can fend for themselves and will gradually find that there's eventually no free spaces for them to be, that they have to pay for every single second of their lives, or be in like some kind of red zone area that's off limits to them. So yes, eventually it becomes such that if you're born into a wealthy family, you become a Taylor Swift almost without any effort. Like there's this whole corridor is paved with money so that you become a superstar and everybody loves you. Whereas if you're a poor person, the entire legal framework is designed to trip you up, send you to jail, keep you poor, ruin your reputation, what have you. There's two completely different sets of laws for two sets of people. Especially if you own a business, then you can own a business and you end up only taking a small percentage of responsibility for the cost that your business incurs. So yeah, you may chop down 100 trees to make 500 couches, but you won't pay for the environmental devastation of that tract of land where there's all this runoff, where all the other animals die. And that's a small example, but the same applies to our entire oceans. The people who fish out of the oceans don't pay for it when they empty the entire ocean and ruin the entire ocean. The person who's poisoning the ocean doesn't pay for the effects of that poison on the entire other side of the ocean when those particles are realized by mammals that are necessary for that ecosystem. So this allows for, like I was saying, a very small amount of people to dominate a very large amount of people. And makes it such that if you have $10 million, it's very difficult to lose it. Whereas if you have $10,000, it's almost a drop in the bucket against the expenses you're going to pay just to breathe. But for instance, there are more and more stories coming out now about wealthy people like nearly killing or killing poor people and just getting away with it by paying a certain amount of money. You'll see this happening in. This could also be police officers who are allowed to legally kill people. This could be a wealthy heir of a casino fortune who beats up his girlfriend with a hammer and then just pays a certain amount of money, gets it completely expunged from his record, and the girl has no choice but to accept a settlement in court, and allows there to be a price tag for everything for rich people. You can do anything you want, you can get away from anything you want if you're wealthy enough. And this is the opposite of the rule of law. Rule of law is the same law applies to everybody. There's a law of the land. We're ruled by law here, and it applies to everybody in this land. Not the, oh wait, but if you're a special weasel, then this law doesn't apply to you. That's not law. That's the opposite. That's lawlessness. Let's go to the review here. We got the infinite growth paradigm. We've got phony elections, fraudulent journalism, two different sets of laws for rich and poor, and the fifth one is a surveillance state, which some might say is a corollary of the fourth one, where there's two sets of laws for two different sets of people. But I would say that the people who are at the very top of the pyramid need to be pretty well concerned about how their lives are also being surveilled 100% of the time. Which is to say that if at the top of the pyramid, there's actually kind of a lot of musical chairs being played. As the total amount of resources shrinks, as more people become aware of the giant fraud of the entire system, even people at the top of the pyramid, if someone can find a way to edge you out using their backdoor into your Google email, then they're going to do it. But the same applies to everyone in the entire pyramid, top and bottom. If everyone is surveilled, nobody has any freedom. If the people who run the system can use your mail to read your mind, then they're going to be able to preempt every move that you make potentially against them, which means they have complete dominance over you. And no society can continue in such a way for long if the people at the very top of it have absolute power. Eventually it's going to devolve into absolute tyranny. Underneath all of this, these are the things that you might do to a country if you're trying to weaken it from the outside. Say you were a smaller country and you wanted to take over a bigger country. Some of the first things that I would do would be to I would influence its media system. I would try and break its legal system so everybody in the country hated each other and was divided because they thought we're the haves, you're the have-nots, or you're this color, I'm that color. I would try and broadcast as much stupidity I could from the loudest bullhorns I could to encourage all the most petty rivalries I could. And then I would get them to burn through all of their resources way faster than they possibly could, and I'd get them to ignore their actual the ecological base upon which their entire society depends. And then, once everything was in flames, everybody was at each other's throats, that's when I would attack. A pattern I see across all five of these root, fundamental crumblings of the American system is that the United States has applied these to other countries before to weaken them. And as such, there could be forces outside the United States or global forces that are trying to weaken the United States. I believe this is true. This could just be bankers. There could be other countries like China, Russia, and Israel that see certain aspects of the American system as a long-term threat to the systems that they're trying to implement on their own people, or the position they see themselves in the world. Of those things, I would find them to be the Bill of Rights. The idea that every citizen has an inherent right, countries like China, Russia, and Israel do not believe that. In all of those systems, there is an inner party that you can only belong to if you're either born into it, prove that you're willing to compromise your values enough, or you're part of one or another religion or ethnic sect. So the idea that everybody in the country is treated by the same laws equally The idea that we're going to protect and conserve our land for the long term, the idea that we're going to have journalists that actually tell it like it is, the idea that our votes in our elections are actually going to reflect the consent of the people, the idea that we're going to be free in our comings and goings and in our writings. These ideas are totally against what China and Russia are trying to, especially China and Russia and numerous other countries in the world, are trying to impose upon their people. They're the opposite of certain aspects that other systems are trying to impose upon their people, or you have basically no rights. If you're just born a Chinese person, you're not in the Communist Party, you have no rights. If you're born into Russia and you're not a friend of a friend of a friend of Vladimir Putin, you have no rights. That means that your children will likely be sold into slavery of one kind or another. That means that you'll never achieve the ability to have your own capital, your own self. That means that if you ever speak up against the system, you'll just immediately go to jail, and no one will even call to ask what happened to you. And this is going to happen in the United States unless we stand up against it. And a lot of people are trying to stand up against it. I'm one of them. You will find, though, that these 5 issues are not ever addressed in the mass media. To a certain extent, you cannot expect the people that are imposing the failures of your system to have a big parade for a discussion about the failures that they themselves are a part of. It's true. And there's that saying Mark Twain said, that if a man will be unable to see something if his paycheck precludes him from being able to see it. Or if you make your money off of all these lies, like heck, if you're going to risk your neck to expose them or speak about them. That's something the United States, through the CIA and the military, has done to lots of other countries in Africa and South America especially. So, as an American, who, maybe more because I'm trapped here than by choice at this point, but I have to recognize that, when I speak out to the rest of the world for assistance, or that, yeah, maybe I've taken some benefit from the way my country has ruined other countries for their profit. So as an American who didn't pull any of those strings and benefited probably very little from any of that shady business, I'm still sorry as an American, and I really am. And I'm still going to ask you for help solving these problems in my country. And if you see the same problems in your country, I would like to help you with those problems there. Well, I have this mind, and I'm going to speak freely. I'm going to think freely until I'm not breathing anymore. This is J. Michael Hudson Presents. Hope it's some information that you can use from the middle of nowhere.